We took all of the material that was presented over those 15 weeks and split it up into 7 different courses that people can take over a period of 18 months. And then we also have a number of kind of shorter courses. We have kind of week-long introduction to practical brewing course. We've got a practical microbiology in brewing course that's actually going to be coming out in July, where people can kind of come in, use our microscopes, streak plates, and get that sort of experiential learning. And then we do, a number of kind of small one-off webinars, 3 hours long, where we bring in kind of industry professionals and they can give us a little peek into their industry. And in addition to that, I also oversee the sensory and consumer science certificate program, which there is a lot of overlap with brewing, but that is a very wide field and focuses a lot on statistical analysis and actually quantifying the consumer satisfaction with particular goods.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure working at the intersection of brewing and education, you learn something fascinating every day. But is this what you imagine yourself doing when you grew up?
Not at all. In fact, I went to grad school at UC Davis for microbiology. And
no, John, I want to go way back. I don't want to go to grad school right now. I want to go like playground when you're just a kid, because you and I, we're close to the same age. If you and I bumped into each other playing in the rocks or something, and I'd said, "Hey, John, what do you want to be when you grow up?" What was your answer back then? As just
for a long time, I wanted to be a paleontologist. I wanted to study dinosaurs. And, my dad was a university professor. He was a geologist. And I kind of always knew I wanted to be somehow involved with the university. And I just sort of being a research faculty member was kind of the de facto goal there. It didn't end up happening. I realized research was not exactly my primary interest. And so it was really, in kind of college and graduate school when I got into craft beer. That was sort of the mid 2000s peak of the craft beer scene. And being a microbiology graduate student at the time, was able to use a lot of the equipment I had in the laboratory for brewing purposes. So I actually still have a yeast library in a minus 80 degree Celsius freezer on campus. I haven't tapped into it in a long time, but they're still there.
So at what point did you give up your dinosaur dreams and realize you might have to focus on something a little less romantic? And not that beer is definitely romantic, but considered dinosaurs, you can't beat that.
Yeah, good question. I'd say probably sometime around middle or high school, I got into actually kind of math and physics, and I went in that track. My undergraduate degree is in physics, and kind of started doing that. I wanted to be a particle physicist and work at CERN and things like that. But then I kind of got sidetracked a little bit with some of the biology, got really into microbiology, fell in love with bacteria. And then that was sort of what took me in this direction, and then kind of made the shift from bacteria into yeast and beer. And now I'm here today.
Dive into that in a minute. But last time you and I talked, and I always enjoy conversations like this, because when we talk in a professional sense, the conversation is a little more back and forth. Now I get to learn so much about you. I can ask those burning questions that I've always wanted to ask. So that's why I really enjoy kind of learning about how a person became the person they are today. And one thing you and I have talked about before is both our love for travel. And you had mentioned that you went to Europe, at an early age. I believe you said 18 or 19, you first backpacked to Europe. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, summer after I graduated from high school.
Did you decide to do that on your own, or was there someone encouraging you to take that adventure of a lifetime?
It was actually the girl I was dating at the time. She was, had some family in Italy, and she was the one that kind of put the idea in my head of traveling, and then we sort of built it out from seeing our family in Italy and just to a whole tour of the continent.
So 2 teenagers grabbed your backpacks, hopped on a plane, went to Italy. How long were you gone for?
It was a 2-month trip.
Wow. 2 months.
Yeah.
I know when I had like 3 weeks, I thought that was an eternity, but 2 months, looking at it, were you a planner then? Did you kind of have an itinerary outside of Italy, or, what was that trip like?
It was an interesting time because I am not, at least I was not at the time a planner. I was kind of like, we're getting on a plane and we'll figure out what we do when we get there. And we had some general plans. We're like, okay, we're gonna start. We flew into Paris. We'll spend 1 week there, and then, but we didn't have any serious, hard dates. We had a Eurail pass, so we could sort of just jump on a train anytime we wanted to move to the next place. And when we were actually in Italy, about the halfway mark, we ended up staying like a week longer than we had initially planned because, we had a free lodging, and it was, being 18 years old, we didn't have a lot of money, so it was nice to have things paid for.
What part of Italy did you stay in for that long?
Rome. So yeah, it was great. It was her aunt and uncle, and they had a summer house, up in the mountains, and so we showed up, got to their apartment, and then they just left the next day and left us the keys to the apartment. And so we just got to hang out. We went down, had some really nice food by the banks of the Tiber River every night, and just kind of relaxed. It was great.
Don't you miss being young, carefree, and just having those ability to travel like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I could
Gosh,
do that now.
great European vacation right now. And, I went to Belgium, I think when I was 18, 19, and 20. And when I went those 3 years in a row, I had a friend whose parent was stationed over that way. And so we had the perfect landing pad to go. You didn't have the rent, just like you mentioned, no, worry about where to find a place over your head. But one thing, I don't want to call it a regret, but one thing that was not part of my experience was beer. I was in Belgium and did not have any notable beers at that point in my life. When you went on this adventure, were you a beer person yet? Were you intrigued by, the drinking culture of Europe?
Not nearly to the extent that I am now. I knew that. I mean, I had tried a few beers in high school, but basically my beer knowledge was Guinness, and we went to Dublin, and I ordered Guinness at the pub, and I felt like this is the height of beer culture in Europe, and it was great. It was fantastic. I did not. I did visit some friends in Germany, some family friends, and they introduced me to Berliner Weiss with the Waldorf syrup in there. And I remember thinking, this is the weirdest thing I've ever had in my life. And it wasn't until years later that I really came to appreciate what went into the production of a Berliner Weiss. So
I wish I had that experience during my travels. Besides traveling and trying that Berliner Weiss, is there anything about this adventure that transformed your life or had a lasting impact on just the way you thought or saw the world?
yeah, I mean, I'd had the privilege of traveling a fair bit when I was growing up with my parents, but this was really the first trip I'd had to Europe, and it gave me, I'd done a lot of traveling in Asia, and just it's a totally different set of cultural differences, really, and it just really opened my eyes that, of course, when you're 18 years old, you think you know everything, right? And it just really gave me this perspective that was like, oh, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of the world that is very different from what I'm used to.
Yeah, I think having the ability to travel at a young age is give you that awesome look at the world, and it helps really shape who you become. And, after you came back from Europe, I don't think we've ever had this conversation. You actually went to Virginia Tech, which is only a handful of hours away from me.
That's correct, yeah.
How did you end up in Virginia?
My dad's family is all from Virginia. So my dad grew up in Waynesboro. And so my grandmother was there. My aunt and uncle live in Stanton. And so it was always a family school. I grew up kind of watching the Hokies play football and basketball. And, at 18 years old, it was the opportunity to be 2,000 miles away from my parents, but still have, a washer and dryer and a hot meal about an hour away at my grandma's house was kind of the ideal situation.
No, it's definitely a nice perk of going to college in your family. So you end up at Virginia Tech, and you ultimately end up at UC Davis as a student. But at what point in these years of your life did beer start playing an important role?
I'd say during my time at Virginia Tech, being in college, there's always the sort of the frat parties and the things like that. And I remember just kind of thinking I didn't really like the beer that was served at the kegers and things like that, and I really got into kind of the craft beer scene. Back then it was Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and Magic Hat #9 were the kind of the exotics. Dogfish Head was there was some kind of fun stuff coming out from there, but I just got interested in it, and I've always been kind of a flavor person. I've always been interested in unique and different flavors, and so that was why some of those craft beers were really appealing to me. And I remember actually, I think it was my senior year. This would have been 2008, and I was like, I want to start homebrewing. This is something that I want to do. But I knew that I was going to be driving out to California, in a few months. And so I did not actually pull the trigger and buy any of the equipment because I think at the time I had a Kia Optima, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to fit all the equipment.
What color was your car?
It was kind of a teal turquoise color with the sparkle fleck paint.
Really fitting for that time period.
Absolutely.
So when you were getting ready to drive cross country, had you already, enrolled and registered at UC Davis, or were you just going back home?
Nope. I had applied, a few months earlier and gotten accepted at UC Davis. And I originally had a whole plan to make a cross country road trip with a good friend of mine. And then at the last minute, I got an invitation to a wedding that was just totally disrupted that, and ended up just driving 17 hours the first day and 14 hours the second day, and just it just was a zombie.
That sounds terrible. I absolutely love driving, but having to do 17 hours in a day, I've done almost that much. It's almost too much. I'd rather, stop at every brew pub along the way, see the scenic viewpoints, and take my time, which is why I am upset I haven't driven cross country, but I can't wait to do so the correct way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we planned it out. We were going to see the giant ball of yarn and the Babe the Blue Ox and everything.
That's my type of trip. But you end up back in California, UC Davis. Were you in the brewing program there, or what did you enroll in?
No, I was actually in the microbiology graduate group. And I came in not intending to pursue beer or brewing as a career path. It was just kind of an ancillary hobby. But I got really into home brewing in my first year here. Had a lot of friends that were, maybe a couple of years ahead of me, and was able to kind of borrow some equipment to get started, and then slowly started building up. And then a couple of my still good friends, we sort of entered a working brewing relationship where the three of us were all combining our forces, monetary and technical. And so we were able to put out a lot of really good beer. We did several weddings where we were the only beer provided was what we had.
This is all in your kitchen, or do you have an actual facility you were able to do it in?
Oh, no. This was just our own homebrew setup in the garage. Yeah. But we did it right. We were able to, when we combined all of our finances, even as graduate students, we were able to get some pretty decent equipment.
Looking at those early homebrewing days, are there any mistakes you made or any really cool science-related, lessons you learned as a homebrewer?
Yeah. I mean, the first several batches I tried to ferment. Well, I did ferment without any temperature control, and everyone always talks about that quote signature homebrew flavor, and it's really just esters and fusel alcohols, really, because people don't have any temperature control. So that was kind of one of the first investments we made was, getting a chest freezer and built up a Renko, an SDC 1000, little wired up temperature PID. And so that once we did that, that was when we really started making beer that people would they would kind of make that comment. They're like, "Oh, I would actually pay money for this."
Did that get the gears turning in your head, like every home brewer who says, maybe someday I'll open my own brewery? Did you ever have that moment?
The thought certainly crossed my mind. I have never been a particularly entrepreneurial person, and so the idea of having my own business just terrifies me, because I see what it does to people. It's so much work, and more power to the people that can do it, but it's just not really what I want to do. I eventually, at some point, I kind of was getting some I don't know, stagnation in grad school. I was not doing very well in my research, and just didn't really know what direction I wanted to go in. And I started thinking at that point that, maybe something in the brewing industry could be where I could go. And so that's when I kind of started looking in earnest.
Did you have any mentors at school or just in your life otherwise who were encouraging you to go that direction?
Not any mentors per se. Like I said, a lot of my cohort and other fellow graduate students, we brewed together, and they would kind of encourage that for sure.
And so you ended up at Heretic Brewing in Fairfield, California, where you founded the QAQC Lab. How did you get hooked in with Heretic? And when they hired you on, did you join the team with the goal of starting that program?
Yeah, so this was probably one of the most serendipitous moments of my career. There's this place in Davis called the Davis Beer Shop, and it's quiet. They've got a really great tap selection. It's not your typical kind of college town bar, and so I was there with a few friends, and the door opens and in walks Jamil Zainasheff and Chris White of White Labs. And I kind of elbowed my friend and I said, "Hey, look who just walked in." And they go and they sit down in the corner, and I'd had a couple of pints in me at that point, so liquid courage. And I just went up, and this was right, about a year or so after Heretic had opened, and I had been following them, listening to the Brewing Network and things like that. And so I just walked up to Jamil and I said, "Hey, I just wanted to introduce myself and say I'm a really big fan." And he kind of leans back and folds his arms, and he says, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a graduate student in microbiology, but I kind of want to get into the industry." And he sort of pauses for a moment. He said, "Well, I'm opening a new facility in March. Why don't you come open a lab?" It was just, it was like literally that.
How like long was that conversation?
Probably about 3 minutes.
Did you think he was being serious, or what kind of follow-up did he give you following those 3 minutes?
I made sure. I said, "Look, I don't have a card or anything I can give you." I said, "But I can shoot you an email right now." And he gave me his email address, and I sent that, and then that just started the conversation. But I was not going to let that opportunity pass by. So I made sure we had some kind of connection.
So I imagine you were so excited. You went back to your friends. You're like, "I can't believe, you won't believe what just happened." But at the same time, you need an email back from him to kind of solidify that this is actually a sincere offer versus just some conversation over beers. At what point did you realize this was real? Like, how long did it take for Jamil to write back?
Yeah, it was, I think over the next couple of weeks was when we sort of solidified it. And I had to make sure that was all right, that I could take off 3 months, from my lab. It actually worked out really well. The graduate program here has this optional designated emphasis in biotechnology, and I was enrolled in that. And part of that is a 3-month internship with a biotechnology company. And so I said, "Hey, brewing is arguably the oldest form of biotechnology," and so yeah, ended up working out as part of my the DEB, as they call it, designated emphasis.
In what year was this, John?
That was 2013.
And so looking back almost 10 years ago, what was the state of QAQC labs in breweries in the United States?
Yeah, great question. Not much, to be honest. There was some the larger breweries certainly had their nice QA labs, but many of the startup breweries, you were lucky to have a pH meter. But as far as any of the dedicated equipment, that was pretty rare to see.
Did you feel like you were going into this opportunity blind? Because I mean, you hadn't worked at a brewery before. You hadn't worked in a brewery QAQC lab before. So did you know the process you were going to go to get this up and running?
I had no idea. I was
How did
literally
that make
flying
you feel?
blind.
Were you overwhelmed? Did you know you could do it? Like, what was that process like?
I cycled between, ecstatic and terrified. It seemed like something that I could do, but I had no idea where to start. But I sat down and just kind of poured through a number of different books. Actually, I'll give a shout out to Terry Ferendorf of Triple Rock Brewing, and she had put together this primer on how to start a QC lab, and just I read through that probably 100 times, and that was the starting kind of the starting point. That was all about HLP tubes, Hughes lactobacillus and pediococcus medium, and why that should be the very first test you ever implement, and how to do that on a budget. She had this really cool diagram of creating an incubator out of a beverage cooler and using a flashlight on a temperature controller as your heat source. I ended up doing something kind of similar to that in the very first lab. I used one of those styrofoam coolers you get at like a bait shop, and then used what do they call it? A firm wrap. It's like a heating element that you can wrap around a fermenter to keep it warm. Use that as the heat source, attached to a Renko temperature controller. And so, yeah, really reading her primer on that, on proper log keeping, and just monitoring everything all the time. And then also the yeast book that was co-written by Chris White and Jamil Zainasheff had just come out recently, and they've got a whole section on QE there, and that really helped out a lot as well.
So working for Jamil, I mean, they had to have expectations of you, hiring you on. What were their goals with creating this lab? I mean, just is there anything in specific they were looking to see results in?
Yeah, I mean, Jamil was always of the mind that he wanted to have the best quality lab that he could get, and knew from the start that he wasn't going to just kind of play it by ear. And so he had this idea that, okay, there's this graduate student who has got some kind of connections with the university, and maybe he can kind of come in and help out with some of the equipment and things like that. It actually worked out pretty well, because there were a few labs that sort of, the principal investigator retired, and they were just giving away all of the equipment, and I was able to source a few things like an autoclave and a centrifuge and an incubator for free or very cheap.
It's nice knowing people at UC Davis, isn't it?
It's a great place to be a part of, for sure.
So while you're working at the brewery, are you still involved in university activities? You imagine you graduated. Did you start teaching right away?
No, so I did that 3-month internship in 2013, and then I went back to school and finished up my Ph.D. So I finished the research in 2016, and then at that point I went back to work full time at the brewery while I was writing my dissertation. I say while I was writing my dissertation, while I was procrastinating writing my dissertation, which I finally finished in 2018. But yeah, so I went to work full time then, and it was sometime in about 2018, actually, I think the spring of 2018, that I have a friend who is on the faculty at Sacramento State University, and he wanted to do a course on brewing and distilling. And so he kind of brought me on. I helped plan the course and taught part of it. And that was kind of what got me thinking about teaching again, and just remembering how much I enjoyed it. I had TA'd all through grad school. I had tutored even as an undergraduate, and hadn't really realized until it was gone that I really enjoy the teaching aspect so much.
What do you love so much about teaching? Like, what's your favorite thing when you're a professor?
I just love the the aha moment when you see it on a student's face, when you have a particularly difficult concept and, their eyes are kind of glossing over as you're going through it, and you say, okay, take a step back, and then you explain it in a different way. And maybe it takes 2-3 tries. And then finally, when it clicks, you see it, and it's just the best part of my job is seeing that.
The reward.
Absolutely.
Is there a specific, lesson you give or teach where you always see that aha moment and look forward to it?
I think one of the big ones is I give a lecture. It's called "Wort Cellar: A Yeast's Perspective," and I put up at the very beginning of the presentation. It's a map, a metabolic map of all of the metabolic processes that go on inside a yeast cell. And I mean, it is super complicated, and it is just a mess, and nobody understands it when it first goes up. And then I kind of work my way through that and talk about all the different parts of it and how they're all interconnected. And then at the end of the lecture, I put that back up, and you start to see people's eyes kind of flitting around in different parts of it and realizing that, oh, they're making those connections. They're seeing what all of these are, and it all makes sense now.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can just imagine the students' faces just changing over the course of your lesson. So at what point did you decide you wanted to go back full-time into academia?
Yeah, it was actually, it was right around, I'd say, the end of 2019, 2020, beginning of 2020. And I had started doing some adjunct teaching at Sacramento City College, and had approached UC Davis to be a part of their Master Brewers program. And it was kind of then that they expressed some interest, although they said I needed some additional, teaching experience. And so that was when I kind of started looking into doing some of the adjunct teaching, and I got to the point where it was like, if I want to go forward, I need to pick one of these. And because I just did not have the time. And at that point I said, I think I'm going to try the teaching route, and it ended up panning out pretty well.
Were you scared to make that decision?
Oh, it was pretty terrifying. I mean, anyone out there who has ever done any kind of contract work will understand this, but as an adjunct, you have no rights, you have no benefits. There is no guarantee that you're going to have a job next semester. So yeah, it was pretty, not the easiest decision to make, but I was fortunate. My partner had a solid job, and she committed to supporting me if I needed it, which at some point I did, but not for very long.
Yeah, speaking to people in your life at that time, I mean, people always look at the craft beer industry as a really romantic industry. We can argue that another day, but you went from brewing to essentially being someone who gave lectures at a college, which don't take this the wrong way, not necessarily as romantic as working in a QAQC lab at Heretic Brewing. What did your friends and family think when you told them that you wanted to make this career change?
I was definitely, most everyone in my life has been very supportive of my decisions, which has been really nice. I've not had to really justify anything to anybody. I know my dad, who, as I said before, was a university professor. I think he was really excited to have something that he could kind of connect with me over. But really, at that point, I'd gotten myself into a situation at Heretic where I was responsible for the not only the quality program, but also I was overseeing the whole packaging program. And we hit some snags with our fairly new canning line, and at some point I was working 16-hour days troubleshooting this and making sure it would produce the results that we wanted. And I was having a bit of a rough go of things, just kind of not really enjoying working in a brewery at that point. And so for a lot of my friends and family, and Dana, my partner, my fiance now.
Your soon-to-be wife, because you're getting married.
Soon-to-be wife. That's true. June 4th. She was very supportive of me moving on to a different position. And I will say, me working those really long hours was 100% my own prerogative there. I was never being forced to do that, but I felt such a responsibility to the company, having been there from near the beginning, that I didn't want to see it go sour. And so it was really, looking back, I didn't need to be doing that. I could have delegated more, but I was really doing it to myself.
That's a tough thing about the industry we work in. We get into it because we have a passion for craft beer, but also that what comes with that is long hours and hard work. And at the end of the day, your happiness is what matters most.
Absolutely.
So looking at the two careers you've had in your life, and then you've been involved in academia since you were a kid because your dad was a professor, what's something the beer industry can learn from your education side of things?
That's a really great question. I think that something
Do
that
we
the
need
beer
more
industry...
lectures, more final exams, things like that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that you can gain from formal education in brewing, and I think that it's absolutely possible to make beer without knowing anything about the molecular biology that's going on, but knowing that can help you make decisions, especially when things start going wrong. So I think just the comprehensive knowledge that can be gained from a formal education, but also the kind of collaboration, and the brewing industry is known as a very collaborative industry, but like the idea that, not everybody is going to be reinventing the wheel every time. People are building on each other's research and adding new knowledge to others' bases, basically. And so I think that's kind of the big part of academia that I think really translates best into the brewing industry.
And I know you didn't dive into the research part of academia like you had mentioned earlier, but do you ever think about certain areas of research that would be valuable to our industry?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, before I kind of made the decision to go into teaching, I was even looking at some other opportunities, and I considered applying as a postdoctoral fellow at some universities around the world, like KU Leuven or the University of Ghent in Belgium, where they've got people working on the kind of microbiology of lambic, and that's sort of where I would go if I were to get back into research. I've always been very into the metabolism and just how that can change as a result of different conditions or different microbial populations.
That sounds fascinating. So looking at your career thus far, outside of getting involved in a project like that, what's one thing you want to accomplish?
I'd say the biggest thing I want to accomplish is creating an industry or affecting this industry in such a way that it really opens it up more. That there's, as everyone kind of, I'm sure, is aware, there's kind of a diversity problem in brewing, right? Most of the people in our industry in this country look like me, white, bearded male, right? And I think that there's so much opportunity to bring in really interesting new ideas and just allow that to kind of enrich the whole industry. You look at some of the breweries that are starting to pop up in this country and around the world, and you're seeing some of the kind of cultural injection that's going into this. And it's like really interesting. You got some really new, fresh ideas. You look at in Albuquerque, there's Bow and Arrow Brewing that was opened by Shyla Shepherd and Missy Begay. And this is the country's first Native woman-owned brewery. And they are injecting in some really interesting kind of indigenous people's culture into their beer. They've got like a blue corn Pilsner, which I think is it's just so cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a blue color in the final beer. But it does have that really, if you know that very kind of signature flavor of blue corn, it kind of has that a little bit in that beer. And just seeing that, the craft beer industry is so focused on the next new thing. And so this is just such a great resource to bring in the next new thing or the next several new things. And looking at the state of brewing around the world, you see some breweries popping up in Scandinavia. You're seeing them in Korea and Japan, and they're putting some of their own kind of cultural touches into that. And I just think that's so cool, and it just makes for some really interesting variety.
No, that's fascinating. It'll be really interesting to see where we are in 5 years, then 10 years, and craft beer in 20 years. What's it going to be like? 'Cause these are conversations that I love having, and at the end of the day, we just need to be better. And I love how you're involved in this initiative. Now, John,
Yeah.
you and I have not met face to face, but we'll be sharing beers. Today is April 27th. On Monday the 2nd, we're actually going to have beers together in Minneapolis, which is going to be fantastic. But more importantly, you're getting married in June, and you're going to go on a nice little honeymoon that I'm sure you're really looking forward to. Where are you going?
Yeah, we are going to the UK. So my ancestry is Welsh, and Dana's ancestors are from Scotland. And so we figured we go hit those and everything in between. And, as much traveling as I have done in Europe, I actually never hit anywhere in the UK. We just sort of skipped right over it. And so this will be a first for me. Dana actually lived in York for a year when she was studying abroad. So that'll be really cool, seeing some of her old haunts. And then, just hitting some kind of family history and, looking forward to all of the real ales I'm going to be trying and just hanging out in pubs.
Are there any activities or highlights you just can't wait for?
I think one of the
mentioned, of course.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things we're really excited for is we're going to hike the Cotswolds. So it's kind of backpacking between pubs. So you don't have to carry, your tent and all your food. You just sort of carry a day pack, but you're walking, 8 to 15 miles a day. And then you kind of hang out in a pub for the evening, and then you walk to the next one. And that'll be probably a 4 or 5 day kind of section of the trip. So that one's really looking forward to that.
That is definitely my kind of trip. You'll have to share more about that, after it's done. I can't wait to hear all about it.
Absolutely.
Well, John, I really appreciate the conversation today. Looking forward to beers on Monday. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to add one last thing. So in this, in my last little kind of spiel there about diversity in the brewing industry, we do have a crowd-funded scholarship that is going towards providing tuition for our Master Brewers Certificate Program. That's a $16,000 tuition there for the online version of the program, but we might also be expanding that to bring somebody in for the on-ground, in-person program. And so you can actually, unfortunately, I can't say the name of this scholarship anymore. It turns out the name that we had for it was a trademarked name for a charitable endeavor. And so, but if you go to UC Davis CPE and then scholarship, you should be able to find that. And there's a crowdfunding link on there. So if you want to help support that, help give some the opportunity for somebody to get this wonderful education that we offer. And you can see some information about this year's recipient, Mariana Schneider, who is Brazilian, but living and working in Copenhagen, Denmark. And she is just an absolute treasure to have involved with us. She's done some really great kind of advertising for us, but the brewer that she's currently working for, Amager Brewhouse in Copenhagen, is I'm sure absolutely happy to have her. She also founded, I think, this group called the Global Ladies of Wort, GLOW, which is somewhat similar to the Pink Boot Society, if you're familiar with that. But it's an advocacy group for women in brewing. But yeah, so you can see some information about her on there, and then also how you can contribute, or how you can actually apply for the scholarship, which will be reviewing applications this fall for the coming 2023 program.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate how invested you and UC Davis are in making our industry better. So thank you again for sharing that. And thanks for the conversation today. And I don't normally get to say this, but we do have some upcoming in-person events that John, maybe he'll be at. It'll be May 2nd. That's next Monday at Arrow Brewing Company. We're having a craft beer professionals get together 7 to 9 p.m. And Tuesday, we're going to be at Inbound Brew Co. in Minneapolis, 6 to 8 p.m. We hope you join us at each. John, I know I'm very, very excited to continue this conversation face to face. Thanks for sharing your story today, and I'll see you in a few days.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.